Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's been a very fulfilling day just listening in to all the speakers. And when I heard Professor Udi speak, I just thought, God, I couldn't possibly match this one because she's absolutely set the entire conference alight by just talking through her experience and her journey as a highly skilled migrant woman. I was going to share some slides, but I will talk through them. So, I will send them through to you so that you can keep them. And if you want to sort of add them to the library of, slide decks for the conference, that's absolutely fine. So I don't think I can match, as introduction of me. Thank you very much for that. My interests as a migrant woman, or one who is classed as a highly skilled migrant woman, stems from my very passion and interest in leadership and community engagement strategy, processes, and protocols. And why have I chosen this interest? So tell you a little bit about me. I am originally from Nigeria and have lived in the UK for 25 years. So I am a mother, a wife, a businesswoman. There are lots of intersectionalities, or identities that I carry. And I straddle multiple cultures just because of who I am and where I have been positioned and places that I happen to have called or call currently home. So if we start to look at, apologies, let's just go back to the beginning. So Amina has asked me very generously, very kindly, and I must say thank you so much. If we were in an in-person conference, I would have asked our audience to please join me to give you a rousing, standing ovation, because this has just been phenomenal, honestly. So I am speaking to all of us about optimizing resilience for career-focused social capital. The intention is, how can we build social capital to be able to forge ahead in our careers as highly skilled migrant women and pleasantly men. So thank you to the men who have joined us today. Listening to everybody who has spoken, I think, it's just interesting to see that I feel as if, God has linked all of our areas of topics so that it syncs quite nicely to how I was intending to sort of end it. We've heard about the need for self-realization. We've heard about how we respond to trauma, to circumstances, to difficulties, to when we're pushed back, to when we have to say no. How do we, forge ahead to break those glass ceilings? We've been told about recovery tactics and recovery methods. And we've also been told about how to thrive, how to succeed. So this, for me, were the four key points I was going to frame my conversation with us today. And in framing this, I'm just going to quickly point us to areas where throughout the day this has become apparent. When Professor Payne spoke, he talked about the challenges that migrant women face. When Professor Udi spoke, she talked about multiple identities, upward mobility, the ability to confidently traverse, a global view of leadership and identity. When Dr. Manjit spoke, she talked about understanding the culture of the organization, or the politics in small p, and she talked about microaggression and the cultural points of difference. And when Caroline Bodnek spoke, a practice educator. She talked about imposter syndrome, about, self-limiting beliefs, about, the need to invest in oneself and grow your own potential. When we heard Dr. Massa, he talked about self-inclusion and raised the issue of gender bias and prejudice, which migrant women or women in general experience, but particularly framing it around migrant women experiences. Dr. Adegoke said something about leveraging the power and influence of networks, and Dr. Chibuzo absolutely, drew our attention to the underlying negative side or negative influences of so-called, networking groups that could be self-exclusive. So this is just to sort of frame it to ensure that or to enable us to understand how in these four pillars, if you like, around having a mindset of today for tomorrow, we have had our speakers shed lots and lots of light. So our key terms, or the key terms that I will be focusing on, are around resilience and social capital. So resilience, I was an area that my research work is around. I had to sort of look at one of the definitions which has drawn me in terms of human capital. So, and it is by the International Institute for Management Development, and they say resilience is the human capacity to meet adversity, setbacks, trauma, and then recover from them in order to live life fully. In my slides, I've highlighted recover and to live life fully as key things to note. Another definition by the Resilient Cities Network says resilience is the ability to withstand, to adapt to changing conditions and recover positively from shocks and stresses. I've highlighted there, recover positively. Now, if we look at the keywords here, it's about recovery, always from some form of trauma or from something negative that has impacted us in such a way that it could knock us off kilter, knock us off, our trajectory of travel. But it goes further to say, when we recover so as to be able to live life more fully. And how can we live life more fully? We adapt those things that have pulled us down, those things that we have seen as detractors. We look at them more critically to understand how we can now navigate them, not just for ourselves, but for people who are looking to come behind us. And in most cases, most of us, if not all of us sitting around this room are either parents or uncles or aunties, or, have that affiliation with family. And when you talk about social capital, you're talking about things which I think all the speakers have referenced, networks, about our ability to thrive in the workplace. We're looking at diversity. We're looking at, our value system. And how do all this then go on to merge and impact on our ability to be more resilient? When we look at the social capital aspect of every society, there are certain benefits that it brings with it. So as one in the leadership space, I've come to realize that building social capital, not just for myself, but for my tribe. And when I say tribe, I mean those who I call are in my collective immediate space. It enables me, it enables them, and it enables all of us seated in this virtual room to share our knowledge, to share our skills, to share the resources we have access to. And this, drives one thing, or one of the things it drives is social mobility. We find out that when we are connected as a group, when we are connected to people with similar interests, with similar aspirations, and information, knowledge, skills, are shared, we start to think and aspire to climb up, to move up the ladder. Every person becomes the next, strong link in the chain of support to move upwards. Through social capital, we're able to build trust within communities, because we need to be committed to the actions we need to take so as to be able to access the external resources we need. So in our own little enclaves, because being someone from Nigeria, and I think what normally happens is, because it's been alluded to by several speakers, is when we arrive, we often seek the familiar. And sometimes the danger in seeking the familiar is you are not often aware of the limitations that familiar group has. So we have to be open, willing, and bold enough to step out of these familiar territories so as to be able to access external resources, external success. Dr. Chibuzo gave an example of some of the groups and networks that have been able to render support collectively by fighting for a common cause as one unitary voice. If we look at social capital, it improves our ability to, lead collectively, not just as individuals. One thing, we've been able, I think, I can't remember who pointed it out, is we are very collectivist as a people, and that is a cultural makeup. But we live a very collectivist community. I think it was Dr. Chibuzo, I think, who talked about the collectivist nature of us as a people. And we are now residing in a society that is very individualistic, where you have to think of yourself first. And that can be difficult to navigate. But if we come together as a group, we build social capital. What we're doing is one person is no longer the only person in the room. Because I speak as a woman who has, on many occasions, and I'm sure many of you sitting here, you look around the room, you cannot see a familiar face. You cannot see somebody who looks and sounds like you. It is always interesting to enter a space and be the only Black person, the only so-and-so, but it then gets very tiring, because you are prone then to either be disadvantaged by your lack of support or be excluded from those key decisions because you have your voice is not powerfully sufficient to be able to lend itself to shifting those thoughts or prejudices. So social capital, enables the building or the creation of role models. We've heard, about sponsorship, allyship, about advocacy. What do these things do for us? It means that when we are in spaces and places where we have not got the leverage to be able to access those higher up hierarchies, having somebody or having a group that collectively has the potential to be able to lend itself, or pivot into those spaces means that somebody will speak up for us, somebody will advocate for us, somebody will go up there and say, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so is worthy of this because they are talented, they have the potential, they have what it takes to excel in that role. When we talk about resilience, what exactly are we talking about? Nowadays, when we talk about resilience as human beings, it has become, the status quo. It is now a way of being, because we see things differently, we think things differently, we respond differently, and we have learned to lead differently because of the multicultural and multidimensional lived experiences we each have and we bring to the table. So I think Professor Udi quite rightly said that as a woman, she comes, as a bicultural woman and a highly skilled one for that matter, she comes and brings with her lots of things that cannot be bought or acquired just by reason and nature of who she is and what her lived experiences have been. And one of the things that I sort of put on my slide was, and then so what? I always ask the so what. So if we're talking about us being resilient people, how do we translate this then into the communities, the organizations, the universities, you know, the businesses that we are all in some shape or form connected to? So I've put here that a resilient community or organization is one that has transformed itself, having built in the values, the attitudes, the belief systems, the agility and structures into its everyday business as usual structures that enable not just it, but us as people, organizations or within that community, to not just recover back, you know, to recover from trauma, from shock, from stress. Because when we leave one culture and come to another, there is some level of trauma and people experience it differently. That's what I've come to discover. So what I would take for granted, somebody else wouldn't, because it is just very, very alien to them. So they build and recover back to where, not just to where they were, but they're able to pivot forward at pace for the benefit of all. So, and I've borrowed some of the terminology from a research done by Deloitte. When we hear, or when I thought about or read, you know, how they talked about resilient organizations and started to sort of position myself in that definition, all of the things that we have talked about, you know, recovery, living well, being able to thrive, to succeed, I started to, in my mind, picture those things as ways in which I would like to be described as a resilient leader, or I want an organization that I am associated with, you know, to be defined or described as it has enabled resilient, inclusive leaders or leadership structures and leadership styles. So I've got a couple of call to actions. And my very first one is around accountability. So as leaders, how are we showing up? Are we showing up as broken? Are we showing up as bitter? Are we showing up feeling, you know, grateful that we've been allowed into the room or into the space? Or do we show up knowing and believing that we really ought to be there? I ask this question not just of the room, but I ask it of myself, because in being resilient, we have to acknowledge where we're coming from, and we also need to be mindful of where we're going and who are those people along the way who have either been stumbling blocks for whatever reason or have enabled us, however, either through encouragement or by shoulder tapping us to say, you need to speak to, you can do X, Y, Z. It is those sorts of things I'm asking us about. So how are we looking to overcome the trauma of our past? Have we become desensitized to the journey of other skilled migrant workers? And I ask this because a couple of years ago, you know, I experienced something that really shook me to the core. And when I was sharing with one of my mentors later on, something came to the fore that I was expecting that because we shared similar type of experiences, they should be sensitized. They should become really sensitive to what I was feeling. But I failed to recognize that they had responded to their own trauma by switching off and becoming desensitized to other people's plights. So are we in that stage where we feel, well, I've had to rough it, you know, as they say in Nigeria, so, you know, it's your time to rough it? Or do we really open ourselves up and allow ourselves our vulnerability and our journey to actually show through, to strengthen those people who are relying on us, to be able to advocate for them, to be able to speak and enable them, because it is really tough. You know, how again are we navigating this only Black voice or only Black face in the room syndrome? Because, you know, we can become complacent and say, well, you know, after all, there's so and so and there's so and so. And if we read lots of reports, the color of money, the color of power, we look at lots of reports that have been published, you know, within the NHS, for instance, there's probably only 8, you know, of 8 chief executives out of over 200 across the country. Now, some people might say, oh, that's progress. There was a time when there wasn't. But is that really progress? And are we now becoming complacent because, you know, we're suddenly seeing 1 or 2 piping up here and there? How do we hold ourselves to account without personalizing the process? Are we able to genuinely enter the room and hold the door open, regardless of what our trauma might be? My second call to action is around how are we able to build and connect capital? And we've talked a lot about social capital, you know, and what a few of our speakers have also referenced cultural capital. And some have in some way referenced economic capital. You know, there's lots of capital we bring as migrant people, but the key ones that enable us to sort of thrive is not just, it's not only our social capital, but our cultural capital, our economic capital. If we have to start to look at how we grow influence through our active networking capabilities in and out of our communities. We have to be willing to step out of our comfort zones. You know, I really started to thrive when I decided I was no longer going to see myself as this Black woman trying to enter this very white space. I started to see myself as this talented woman who needs to enter that space because I bring value to the table. I have what I need to offer. And we have to kind of have that mindset shift. I think it was Dr. Manjit who said she doesn't define herself, you know, as an ethnic minority woman because it is limiting. You start to look out for who is the next Black or brown person in the room. But if I step into a space, I don't care who's sitting down there. You have to tell me why I don't belong. And it must be on competencies, not just on how I look. And I say this as somebody who has been knocked back several times because of how I look, you know, and my name. My full name is Ashiedu. And I've had people say to me, can I call you Ash? Or some people will just deliberately refer to me as Joel. And I take back my identity and I say, you will not, you know, misgender me or other me. You will refer to me by name because our names mean a lot to us as cultural people. And in my journey, I find that that is one way we feel our identity is stripped off, because 25 years ago when I came, it was the norm for people to change their names, anglicize their names, just so that, you know, we could get into work. So for me, who didn't anglicize her name, I had, you know, a lot more hoops to jump through. So how and where are we leveraging our cultural values for success? I think one of the speakers talked about the fact that we are very expressive as a people when we speak. How have we learned to use or hold power in our expressiveness? Because it can swing both ways. We can be expressive and somebody will label you the angry Black woman, the angry Black man, you know, the man or woman who doesn't use their initiative, because we come from cultures where we respect authority. So thank you, Amina. So we have to get to that point where we hold spaces, we hold power, understanding what our cultural values and cultural positionings are. What are we doing with, you know, with our cultural competence and cultural intelligence? We have to embed this as part and parcel of business as usual. It cannot be that we talk about cultural sensitivity, cultural competence, or cultural intelligence as standalone concepts. They have to be part of the way policies are designed, strategies are scoped and drafted and written. Finally, my last call to action is around ownership. How do we ensure that ownership of our journey, of our story, is a hearts and minds affair, not just an intellectual exercise? You know, as migrant workers, we own and experience the situations that seek to hinder our growth and our progress. So we must always have that at the front of our minds, that we own those situations, they're ours. The stories around them are ours. The experience is ours, but what do we do with them? We have to adopt a community approach to building social capital. Our collective expertise is a worthy force to be reckoned with. How can we ensure that we have safe spaces to challenge? How can we have challenging dialogue to be able to boost resilience? How can we ensure that no one person is marginalized, no one tribe, you know, is othered because they are not, you know, in great numbers? And my closing remark, and I say what I say now as a cautionary note to leaders, to aspiring leaders, because us as older migrant workers have had to endure a restricted and very exclusive journey into leadership. But the upcoming generations are no longer waiting to be ushered in or virtue signaled into the room to speak up. They are now creating their own tables. They're using platforms, forums of empowerment and service. So what is happening is, slowly but surely, anyone or any organization that fails to recognize that the world is now a global village, it is no longer just for a particular group who think or act elitist, but that we all have a right to the resources, we have a right to leadership, we have a right to progress, we have a right to succeed. Those offices, we have a right to them, because our talent, we come with a lot of talent. And I want to remind us, you know, as migrant workers, that we have to enable ourselves by building very strong talent pipelines. You know, in closing, the experiences of highly skilled migrant workers, men and women, cannot and must not be minimized. Our stories and our voices must be heard, and inclusion cannot, should never be a tick box exercise. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Amina.